In the councils of government, we must guard against the NFL draft, industrial complex.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of the Draft Industrial Complex. That's right. The powers that be have not shut us down yet. I'm Aaron Nagler, co-hosting with the mo-hosting Tyler Brooke. Tyler, how are you today, man?
Dealing with a little bit of a cold, but I'm glad to be here. So if I start getting stuffy on the show,
it's that time of year, brother. That's right. We're all playing hurt.
Letting the dog out in negative temperatures last week, I think did a number on me. But it's my flu game. It's my flu game today. Ready to be there.
Here you go. Appreciate everybody who checked out the first episode last week here on YouTube, and the folks who, and I cannot believe the response on Spotify, Apple.
Awesome.
Like, people actually be listening and downloading. I really appreciate it, everybody. We'll keep going as long as you guys are listening. And look, there's a lot to talk about this week, Tyler, as you know.
Yeah.
But first up, I wanted to kind of take a look at the games yesterday in the NFL and just kind of reiterate, and something we talked about last week, and it did somewhat underline how important the draft is when you're building a roster that wants to compete for championships. Now, there's only one team every year, and the last couple of times it's been the Chiefs. Hopefully the Eagles change that 2 weeks from today or 2 weeks from yesterday. But, man, you just look around the rosters, all those squads yesterday, and, man, you just understand implicitly how important the draft is when you're talking about building your roster, but also building a program and finding your core of guys to try and go, obviously win a bunch of games and hopefully contend for a championship. Each one of those teams has utilized the draft maybe a little differently, but the contributions all throughout yesterday's games was apparent pretty much throughout both games.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, the Washington Commanders, even though they lost, I think are like the perfect example of what the draft can do for a turnaround. And like, granted, new coach, new ownership, new GM, and then I think they kind of hit some home runs with their free agent signings. But you got potentially the greatest rookie quarterback season ever in Chase Daniels,
right?
And then quietly, just another pick I loved in their draft was Mikey Sanders, still, who was supposed to be a slot corner.
Dude, it's so funny you say that, because literally all day yesterday I was thinking that was my hope for kind of solution and or kind of when I assumed last season the Packers were going to bid Keyshawn Nixon adieu. He was legit. I talked about this with Ben Fennell last year. That was like, just insert him in the slot. And that goes to show how little I know, because I had blinkers on and I was like, oh, he's just a slot corner. And there he is yesterday, doing really good work. Now, obviously, he gets taken advantage of at times, but, man, that's a rookie out there playing some really legitimate snaps on the perimeter and in the slot.
Yeah, and to your other point, just about how important the draft is, it's also important to remember that, like, progress, especially as a rookie, isn't linear or, like, immediate, probably is the better word to say it. Because I keep thinking of Xavier Worthy, who, like, halfway through the season, looked like he stunk.
Yep.
And then became, at the tail end of the year and then in these playoffs, has become an invaluable part of that offense and has really unlocked a lot for Patrick Mahomes and the team. And I'm going to be honest, I knew it was going to happen. Just everyone should have known. Like, you just knew that, like, someone was going to break out. And, of course, it's Xavier Worthy. But a kid that has no business at his size being a good NFL player has become a focal point of that offense, and deservedly so. To bounce back from like the lows he had in the middle of this year, like, that kid deserves all the props in the world.
Well, that's a great point too, as far as immediate contributions from rookies, guys coming along at different paces, and also what they're asked to do inside of whatever the scheme is. I mean, you look at two other rookies in the Eagles secondary, whether it's DeJean or Mitchell, and you're talking about their immediate contributions this season. Well, it does help when you have Vic Fangio, one of the greatest defensive minds in the game, drawing up your defensive plans, and the fact of the style of defense they're being asked to play is very different than what they might have been asked to play in some more man-heavy schemes in other cities with other kind of talent around them. So part of it is, yes, these rookies absolutely grabbing hold of the opportunity, but there's also context and situation that goes into each and every one of these players. And that's, to me, to bring it back to the draft industrial complex, where I try to maybe not throw water on, but I do try to pull the reins back when people are talking about, oh, this guy's definitely the number one whatever position. It's like, well, okay, yeah, maybe. And there's a decent chance, especially if we're looking at a generational talent, then yeah, there's a good possibility he might be that. But man, so much goes into it once you get to the league as far as your fit who you're playing with, who your staff is, what scheme you're in. That's why I kind of bristle at a lot, especially when it comes to the list making, you know?
And like, I'm going to laugh at the new Titans GM for like saying someone's a generational prospect. Shout out Bukowski and I arguing about that, because I might have been a little hyperbolic calling Will Anderson one of those back in the day. But instead of thinking it as such concrete by draft position, they are going to be this. I like to start thinking of it as like standard deviations from the mean of like where you're being drafted, right? Like range of outcomes for a first round pick versus a 7th round pick, far more likely to be good. Does not to say that they're guaranteed to be good, just like I was 7th rounder. Probably more likely to not be much of a player, but there's still, X% of 7th round picks that are going to be something. So it's more of just thinking of like, what is the likelihood that this guy is going to be a player? And then obviously, biggest thing for me, the more I've watched this is the fit right, or someone just drafting a guy where it makes no sense, but like everyone pressured them into taking the really cool prospect.
I mean, and it sounds silly, right? Multi-million, if not billion-dollar businesses, but we see it, throughout history that does occur. Let's look at some of the headlines being made around the draft world just in the last week, but specifically, I mean, we've got 2 bowl games. Essentially, one's already up and running in the East-West Shrine Game. Senior Bowl starts this week. And, you talk about the Shrine Game. Obviously, Colorado participating means the headlines are all about the Sanders kids, essentially. Shedeur Sanders didn't practice at the Shrine Bowl. And I know Charles McDonald reported that he was asked not to compete by essentially the 3 teams at the top of the draft. And I know there was some other reporting around it. My good friend Matt Miller said he couldn't get confirmation of that from any of the teams team sources that he talked to. But I got to admit, it does feel weird for an NFL team to tell a kid don't compete. But at the same time, it makes a world of sense to me.
So from everything I hear, and I'm not an insider or anything like that, I pretty much get all my information secondhand from people I do really trust. That being said, everything I've heard is that basically he was never going to participate in the Shrine Bowl in the first place. It was really just kind of a PR stunt to get some exposure to the Shrine Bowl, which I'll be completely honest, I have buddies in the Shrine Bowl. I always root for them, and I actually think they do a really good job. So was thrilled to see that they got kind of that pub. But in reality, it was to try and highlight some of his teammates. And then he can go there not to play or compete, but to really actually meet with teams. And I think that is the kind of underlying part that we don't really talk about with these all-star games. It is a huge opportunity for a kid to be in one central location where all these teams are, and instead of having to go fly everywhere, actually meet. And like there's literally videos on the internet you can find of Shedeur talking with Brian Dable and the Giants already on the field and in the hotel.
Talk about that in a bit.
So like it's just an opportunity for guys to meet. And like if your draft status is already secured, you will see those guys who are clearly, like I think about Devon Witherspoon a couple years ago, blew up the combine or Senior Bowl or something. And he was just like, I don't need to do anything else. I'm done. We're just going to wait until April. Once your status is secured as a 1st round pick or a top 10 pick or whatever it is, these guys kind of just pull back from everything else.
I mean, I think it makes all the sense in the world.
Totally agree.
I understand it. And the hand wringing to me is a bit precious. But 2 other players, we mentioned the Sanders kids. Shiloh Sanders didn't practice, the Colorado defensive back, which I, again, didn't find surprising. But Michigan defensive tackle Kenneth Grant not going at practice. I really was looking forward to him participating in this kind of event in the practices. And I got to say, as someone who's very interested in his game, especially because the Packers are so interested in defensive line help, I was disappointed to see him not participate.
I think it's another one of those guys. He's probably gotten some assurances from some teams. I've heard some rumblings that there are teams, including the Packers, that are pretty interested in him in the 1st round, which totally makes sense because he is an absolute monster of a human being. I think it, honestly, with the competition he's playing there, I'm not sure how fair it would have been. I'm not saying that to really gas him up too much, but I think he would have
visions of him throwing people around like rag dolls. Is that what you're saying?
That's probably what would have happened. And again, like I think at the end of the day, if he knows he's going to be a 1st round pick, I imagine he's going to be at the combine, doing the medicals. It's just again another opportunity to go somewhere where you can meet with teams. A little surprised it is at the Shrine Bowl. I would have been expected him to be someone that was like a Senior Bowl guy, but still, I mean, just an opportunity to meet with teams and avoid injury or potentially hurting yourself against quote unquote weaker competition.
Well, you mentioned Dable and the Giants brain trust, the video that I think most people saw. it looked like they were just like hanging out at some kind of buffet area there in the Shrine Bowl kind of goings on. But it is fascinating to me how the Giants brain trust, you got to think they're on a bit of a job saving tour, like no doubt. I think there were plenty, and I know there were plenty of Giants fans who were maybe dismayed or disappointed at the decision to bring the GM and the coach back. Obviously, now Packers fans don't have to look much further than Xavier McKinney and the job he's done in Green Bay, but at least there, they had a really good draft class. Yeah. They have some really promising talent at the safety spot and a couple other spots. The Saquon Barkley episode, now that makes it 10 times worse, and that's going to be highlighted throughout the next couple of weeks with the Super Bowl. So I understand that these guys have got to get this right. But I come back to, they had a pretty good draft last year.
Yeah,
so if they can find a quarterback, which is a pretty big ask this year in particular, I understand the idea behind the Giants going, okay, you've laid a decent groundwork here, but we got to turn this around quickly, especially when you see the Commanders doing what they did this season.
And what's funny is, like, in theory, I think they've been going about it the right way too. Like, we can argue about Daniel Jones because he's not a good quarterback,
right?
But they stuck with him and continued to invest in the trenches, which is, I think, the proper way to build out a team long term. And now, I don't think the tackles have been home run picks by any means, but I think when healthy, they have enough of the team on both sides of the ball where a quarterback can really elevate this team. So the big question is, you kind of screwed yourself out of getting to pick who you want unless you're willing to trade up with that Colts game. And as a born and raised Hoosier, that felt a little gross to watch. So watching Drew Lock have one of the most efficient games in NFL history.
Who knew?
Yeah. But I'm very interested that they're paying so much attention to Shedeur. He's not my QB1. He's not my QB2. We can talk about that in a little bit.
Okay.
Nothing against the kid, by the way.
No, of course
not.
Any
issues with them. But I am very interested they're playing their hand this much. Is it subterfuge? Is it any of that? And that is my least favorite part of the draft. But clearly,
it is part of the draft. That's the thing. Can't deny it.
And they have to take a quarterback. Like, I think everything else they've gone, and if they want to save their jobs, it's the unfortunate part of the league. But it is a quarterback-driven league, and you got to get the quarterback position right. Good news is, there might be some faults about Daboll as a head coach. I don't know. I do believe in him in developing quarterbacks. So I am curious to see how that goes.
Yeah, I'm with you there. We'll get to we got lots of time to get to your lists, sir. We'll get to quarterbacks and wide receivers and all that. But right now, I want to talk about some of the standouts that we've seen kind of coming out of the Shrine Bowl first couple days. We're on day 3 now as we record this. I know they've had a couple practices. And look, you can't start this conversation or talk about it in any way, shape, or form without talking about Maryland defensive tackle Jordan Phillips, who, I don't care who you're listening to, reading, following along on social media, everyone has talked about how this kid has absolutely dominated the proceedings.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of these guys that are standing out, I've only watched 115, so a lot of these guys I've not gotten to yet, but he's a guy that's gotten added to the list. And when you're dominating the one-on-ones, I think as far as one-on-ones go, I think there's much more value in the O-line, D-line reps versus the wide receiver corner because, in theory, there's no pass rush. These guys can run a quadruple move and everyone will like, oh, well, look at this sick rep. It's so viral. But when you're dominating these one-on-one reps in the trenches, I'm always impressed. So curious to see how he's doing there. And he's been added to the list. Can't wait to watch him.
And then another guy that I've seen mentioned a couple times, and this is a guy I'm interested in watching. This is I have not even seen a lick of tape on, but Boston College center Drew Kendall is apparently having a nice kind of time. And I only bring him up because, man, you've got the Boston College connection on your staff. Now, obviously, he was a head coach in Jeff Hafley, so he should have some familiarity there. And you do have the decision, if you're the Green Bay Packers, about whether to pay Josh Myers or not. I'm not saying like enter this kid. I'm just saying it. Anybody who there's even a tangential connection where I can draw a line, no matter how crooked it might be, to the Green Bay Packers, I'm going to be paying attention.
And Boston College over the past few years has produced some pretty legitimate offensive linemen. I think Chris Lindstrom, Mahogany ended up filling in for Detroit this year is pretty good. There was a guard. There's no way I'm going to remember his name. And I know he's starting somewhere. It's going to drive me nuts. Someone in the comments, please let me know because it's going to bother me for the next few weeks. But yeah, I trust their pipeline of offensive linemen. Packers need a center. There's the Jeff Hafley connection and someone I hope I get to. If I don't and the Packers draft him, I will just assume he's good because we talked about this last week. If the Packers draft an offensive lineman, it's like the Spurs when they draft someone in the NBA draft. I'm like, that guy will probably be good in a few years.
Yeah, there's a decent chance, no question about it, especially if they're selected on day 3.
Yeah.
Another name I keep seeing kind of pop up here is Elijah Roberts, the defensive end out of SMU. I'm not familiar with his game, but I have seen clips and I'm intrigued. Let's say that.
Can I interest you in a 290-pound defensive end power rusher?
Yes.
Because I know I can with Gutekunst. That's all you need. Yeah.
Right.
That's all you need to hear. I've watched a bit of him. I've not given him a final grade yet or anything like that. But from what I've watched, I've been impressed. Like, that's a powerful rusher that is very strong with his hands. He can control the point of attack. He can get into the backfield. Like, he's not the most explosive athlete, but he's so dang powerful with that frame and has a sense of where the ball is going. Want to watch more of him, but he was a guy I was really intrigued with, especially again when we're talking about this 4-3 switch and getting guys that fit Hafley's scheme. That's a guy I've circled. Like, I'll probably watch him after this pod, honestly, because I've been very interested in his game from the flashes I've watched, and I think that could be a player in day 2 or day 3.
Another guy I've seen pop up a number of times is Kobe Bryant, the Kansas corner. Got to admit, I've not watched a whole lot of Kansas. Certainly have watched the clips and been impressed, but again, like I say, I try not to draw too much from one-on-ones at an all-star game where there's no help, there's no scheme, it's legit just mano a mano with infinite space. I try to give some grace there, but I do like what I've seen.
Yeah, so I've watched both Kansas corners. I've watched and graded Mello Dotson, and then just obviously in passing, you watch the other corner while you're doing that. Kobe's an alpha, which I love. You need a corner that's a little unhinged in your secondary, and I think he's got that.
The Packers may be getting rid of one this year, so this offseason.
The problem with that mentality is that Bryant's only 170 pounds, so like we're talking about an extremely tiny guy, but he's athletic. He's long. He has that mentality. He is an asset in run support, which will blow you away. But if someone gets a clean block on him, it's over. And I don't think he plays with the best technique as a corner. He's kind of playing out of control, freelancing a bit. But hey, if Wiggins can thrive in the NFL with Baltimore, which is like a notorious physical defense, and he was freaking awesome this year. I'm starting to rethink my entire philosophy about small wide receivers and corners.
Well, it's interesting you say that because it does speak to what we were talking about before, as far as get him in the right situation with the right coaching staff and the scheme and what you're asking him to do. I think there's definitely a case to be made or a pathway for players that like that, where traditionally you might not think, hey, that's probably not the best fit. But I don't know, man, so much, again, goes back to what situation are they in? What situation are they going to be in if they are drafted by your program?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I always kind of, I don't know, I won't say quiver, but I always kind of shake my head when people say, oh, they're going to take him off the draft board. I mean, unless this guy's out like robbing 7-Elevens, I put him on your draft board. I don't, the physical stuff, like, again, it goes back to don't tell me what he can't do. Tell me what he can do. And everyone can help you. All players have value. It's just where you value them in the draft.
Totally
to me, anyway. Another name I've seen quite a bit, and I love his game from what I've seen. Juice Wells out of Ole Miss, the wide receiver. This cat, he can move off the line of scrimmage. Like, he is fun to watch.
Yeah, so the last 2 years at the high school level, I've gotten to coach wide receivers, which has really opened my eyes to watching the position. And when I watch Wells, I'm so fascinated because, like, I'm going to just say I don't think he's a great athlete. I don't think he's a burner. I don't think he's a big-bodied, I'm going to go up and moss you kind of guy. But everything he does from a technique standpoint really impresses me. Whether it is, getting off the release, like you were saying, or decelerating onto your like curl comeback routes. One of my favorite things he does is on those throws where he's getting thrown at and it's clearly like this guy's just draped all over me. Throw by technique, which is basically a push off without getting called for a push off.
Hey, there is Jordy Nelson made a career out of that.
100%. And there is an art and a technique to it, to not getting in. Someone needs to teach George Pickens that, because holy cow. But it's a guy that has that release package, that deceleration ability, and these moves when he's blanketed to find enough cushion to get the ball. I see him as a day 3 guy because there's lack of top end traits, but I think he's going to be productive in some offense, as like that 3rd or 4th option.
One final guy I wanted to mention, and I legit just added him last minute before we went on here. I I just sent myself a note because I saw exactly what we were talking about last week as far as a bad rep getting put on social media. And, it was Noah Williams, the corner out of Cal, who I think is a good player. And like once I kind of read about him, because I saw this clip and I'm like, well, okay, he had a bad rep where he slips in coverage, right? And someone, it's a bad look for Noah Williams. And yeah, it was a bad rep. But man, you go and you watch his tape, he looks pretty intriguing. He's a kid where I love his physicality and I love his ability to use what looks like a pretty long frame to control wide receivers off the line of scrimmage and to play to his leverage, to play to his help. Again, something you don't get in an all-star game. So it just popped in my head because of what we talked about last week. It's like, that's the perfect example of, no, it's not a good look, but it's one rep.
There's something so beautiful about you schooling me on a prospect I have not watched because I really enjoyed that. So I'm going to watch him now. He's on the list.
Check him out, man. I like his game. He is, again, the only reason I looked at him at all is because he had a bad rep. And I'm just instinctual to be like, okay, yeah, it's one really bad. It is a bad look, but man, there's no way he's been invited.
Yeah, exactly.
Been asked to participate if he's a bad player. Clearly he's not. And he's someone who the only reason, again, he got put on my radar was because of this social media clip. And I want to be a force for good, Tyler.
You need to hype him up, man. You need to send him this clip. He's going to run through a brick wall.
I'm all in. I'm all about it. It's funny. We're talking about the Shrine Bowl, and now today the Senior Bowl is kind of rumbling to life. And it's interesting to me how, you mentioned, people at the Shrine Bowl as do I. And I've gotten to know Jim Nagy, who runs the Senior Bowl a little bit over the course of these last couple of years. It's fascinating to me to see it getting a little spicy between the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl. Obviously, the Shrine Bowl, like you said, is trying to generate buzz, trying to generate kind of recognition, etc. Jim, I think, was not subtle with his, I guess you'd call it a subtweet the other day, talking about how, the idea of asking a player to not compete is anathema to everything we're about, or, I'm obviously paraphrasing here, but it is a world, I believe, where both of these things can exist. And I do think, obviously, the Senior Bowl is entrenched as kind of the premier all-star game. Yeah. But it is interesting to see the kind of the territorial stuff spring to life here.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the first year I've seen that happen. I've seen those jabs in person too, which can get a little awkward. Nice. But I get it. They are literally direct competitors competing for the same pool of resources, which is these prospects. And you want to highlight the best prospects possible. And for Nagy and the Senior Bowl to reign supreme, they have to take shots at the little guys. I don't think it's anything personal between them. I just think it's the nature of how that works. And that's competition, especially in a sport where everyone that works in this industry is competitive psychos. Yeah, I mean that in a complimentary way. Everyone is wired to be irrationally competitive at all times.
What was the old George Young quote? The old general manager for the Giants. We are not in the business of well-adjusted human beings. That is,
boy, I've shadowed some coaching rooms, dude. That is true.
That is 100% true. Yes.
I used to have dreams of being in even a D1 office, and I've been sitting in those rooms. And I'm like, I don't think I have this. I don't think I'm
whatever this is. It ain't in me, man. I know. I feel you. I totally feel you.
I mean, we all love the sport, and I think at the end of the day, these are vitally important. These are great for the kids, and I think we need to remember that at times, especially when this is getting too hostile. Because I think both of these things, and I think the other part gets overlooked. I believe the Shrine Bowl goes to charity, all the proceeds.
Yep.
It's stuff like that that's also important that we need to not gloss over.
Yeah, very much agreed. And turning towards the Senior Bowl here, we mentioned it starts up this week, and it's rumbling to life, as it were. This is an important stretch for the Green Bay Packers and their coaching staff. I actually just had a chat with Paul Brettel about this, but I did want to touch on it here because, we're talking about the draft, and this is a Green Bay Packers channel, and you cannot deny how important the Senior Bowl is when it comes to the Packers draft process. Yeah, I mean, they are littered with dudes that they selected in the draft who not only attended the Senior Bowl, but who have, done pretty remarkably well that week in Mobile.
47 Senior Bowl players since Brian Gutekunst took the job have been drafted or signed by the Packers, including 9 this year.
I'm just saying.
Jordan Morgan, Javon Bullard, Marshawn Lloyd, Evan Williams, Oladapo, Glover, Michael Pratt, Kalen King, and then Peter Bowden, all just this year from the Senior Bowl.
Yep.
it's important. They have coaches there this year, like literally working with the kids. Is it linebackers? No, offensive coordinator. I was thinking
Jason Vrabel is doing the offensive coordinating, and they have a defensive coach on the other end. But yeah, it's nice to get that. Obviously, the hands-on stuff and up close and personal. But man, you like I said, you just illustrated it right there. It's clear that having the context of going up against the best in an environment where you're allowed to be up close and personal and have that one-on-one kind of back and forth, see how kids respond to certain situations. You can't stress enough how important this week is in the draft process for Green Bay.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm just thrilled that they have coaches specifically on the staff to work with kids. The fact that Vrabel's running the offense, like, there's a lot of receivers in this.
Yeah, there are.
I really like. Every time I watch a new one too, I'm like, ooh, I can see it.
All these toys.
I can see it. They won't take any in the first round, but we can get excited about
these. No, they won't. They won't. But let's get excited about some of these prospects
for sure
coming into this week. I know you've intimated you've watched a lot more than I have. Let's go through a couple of guys that you're looking, maybe who have the biggest questions this week. Down in Mobile, Alabama, what are you looking for and who are you looking at?
So the first one I have is not a Packers one, but I think it's probably the biggest storyline of the Senior Bowl, and that is, can Jaylen Milow solidify his status as QB3 at the Senior Bowl? Shedeur and Cam Ward are going to be the top two guys drafted. I just think there's no way around that. But that third is kind of open. Is it Quinn Ewers? Is it Jackson Dart? Is it Milroe? Where I stand right now before it, and we talked about this earlier, Jaylen Milow is my QB2 right now. Caveat, I really liked Anthony Richardson. Other side of it, I also had QB1s as Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson in their drafts.
Okay, all right.
I love physical tools, and I love kids that are wired the right way. And Jaylen Milow checks both of those boxes for me. When Milroe got benched, it's one of my favorite moments the last few years of college football. He got benched by Nick Saban, and his backup was starting and scored a touchdown, and the reaction from Milroe off the sideline was everything I needed to know about that kid's character. Like genuine excitement for his buddy. Just seems like the ultimate competitor, like good teammate. And then my comp for him is like a juiced up Justin Fields, like killer deep ball, great mobility.
Right.
There's been some buzz. I have not been able to confirm it, but there's some scouts that view him as a potential running back prospect because of his size and speed.
Oh boy, here we go.
But like, I think there's something to just like, that's how much people value his mobility. I think he has the best deep ball in the class, and like everything else is still a work in progress. I think he should have gone back to another year of school, but the traits and leadership stuff I love so much. It's why I've been willing to stamp my like thing as QB2. That being said, if things go poorly, I'm ready to, pull the plug and move him down. If things go poorly,
important week for young Milroe.
That's what I'm saying, though. It is impactful because, like, it's going to solidify his draft status. He could be a first-round pick with a good Senior Bowl. I feel pretty confident in saying that.
I love it. What about? Is there anybody along the edge that you're looking at as far as Packers fans are going to be wanting to hear about and look at and follow along any kind of prospect that might be able to wreak some havoc along the edge of this Packers defense?
Two names I think could be available late first or even the second. But my favorite is Donovan Ezraku. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but out of Boston College, another Jeff Hafley connection. Came in with the weirdest measurables today. It's like 6'2", 248, but he's got 34.5-inch arms. And you want to talk about like a bendy edge rusher, which is something that the Packers are really missing. This dude's bendy as heck. He's got inside-out moves. And for a guy that's quote-unquote on the smaller end of edges, I really like his technique against the run. Really excited to see him this week, especially when he has those opportunities to win with speed, especially on one-on-ones. But the other name who is probably more likely going to be a first-round pick is Mike Green out of Marshall, who led all of college football with 17 sacks this year.
Holy
small school guy, right? But the film against Ohio State and Virginia Tech are just phenomenal film. He's got a good spin move. He's got some counters. He's got twitch. He weighed in over 250, which is great to see. He's one of those guys that, like, the small school guys are always the ones I want to watch at the Senior Bowl that have good tape because I want to see
how they rise to that occasion,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So really looking forward to him because if he has a good Senior Bowl, I think he's going to solidify round one status, and he's probably going to be right in that range of when the Packers are picking.
I like to hear that. What about let's talk sleepers. You got a sleeper this week? Anybody that maybe is a name that's a bit under the radar, people aren't really kind of paying attention to that you want to see down there in the Senior Bowl?
Bilal Cohn, cornerback out of Western Michigan. I've got some buddies that played at Western, and one of them was like, he was a receiver and had to go one-on-one against Cone. And it was like, this cat is crazy. So I've watched a little bit of tape of him on him, and I really like what I see. He's an outside corner. He's a little smaller. Again, it's another one of those opportunities. I just want to see what he does against NFL competition, because I think he's gonna potentially really stand out and solidify himself as a day 3 guy.
I love it. I can't wait. I'm going to follow along with all of those, and I'm going to totally pump them up on social media if they hit. And if they have bad weeks, I'm going to absolutely ignore it. So that's how.
Oh, I thought you were going to rip me to shreds. You can rip me to shreds, man.
I'm here as a force of good, Tyler. Don't tell me what he can't do. Tell me what he can do. I'm
Tyler Brooke guy. He can't scout. He can't evaluate.
I don't want to hear about all that. I'm just here for the good stuff. Tyler, this is always a treat. I can't believe how easy you make this. This is tons of fun. I will be down in New Orleans next week.
Nice.
We will continue on the road. The content machine does not stop. So I'll be joining you from Radio Row next time we talk. And we'll probably just recap Senior Bowl and obviously look ahead to the Super Bowl and the offseason and all that fun stuff. In the meantime, thanks so much for the time, man.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the NFL draft.